My wife betrayed me and left because I spend more time at work, which helps me pay for my father's treatment. I threw her out of the house and took back the ring. I met Morgan back in college. She was everything I wasn't: energetic, passionate, and fiercely independent. I, on the other hand, was the quiet guy who liked to keep to himself, preferring a good book or an evening with a video game over social events. Somehow, despite our differences, we clicked. She brought a kind of energy into my life that I didn't know I needed, and I grounded her when she felt too overwhelmed by the chaos of the world. We balanced each other out, and it worked. By the time we were in our 4th year of dating, we were already planning our future. We talked about getting married, maybe buying a house somewhere near the coast. But despite all our dreams, there was one thing that kept threatening to unravel it all: my job at the family restaurant. It all started about a year into our relationship when I joined the restaurant. It had been my family's business for as long as I could remember. My dad had run it for decades, and when he fell ill, I stepped in to help. The hours were grueling, especially the evening shifts, but I didn't mind. I thought it was my duty to keep the business going. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it paid the bills, and I knew it would make my dad proud. Morgan, however, wasn't thrilled about it. At first, she was understanding. She knew it was important to me, and she wasn't going to get in the way of my responsibilities. But over time, she began to resent it. The late nights became more of a problem. We couldn't go on spontaneous trips, or even have dinner together during the week. There were nights when I'd be stuck at the restaurant until well past midnight, and by the time I got home, Morgan would already be asleep. We'd go days without seeing each other, and when we did, it felt like we were just passing through each other's lives. One evening, about 3 months before we were supposed to get married, everything came to a head. We had planned a quiet night in, just the two of us. I had promised her that I'd leave work early, but when the evening rush came, I couldn't leave. I'd already worked the entire day, but there was just too much to do. I had texted Morgan, but I could tell she wasn't happy when she didn't respond. By the time I got home, she was waiting for me, her arms crossed, an unreadable expression on her face. "You promised," she said quietly, her eyes flashing with frustration. "You promised we would have tonight, but you chose the restaurant over me again." I tried to explain. "Morgan, I'm sorry. You know how it is. There's so much to do. I didn't want to cancel on you." Her voice raised slightly. "It's always the restaurant. You never have time for me anymore. And don't give me that 'I didn't want to cancel' crap. You could have come home at a reasonable hour, but you stayed there. You always stay there." I was taken aback. I didn't think it had gotten this bad. I never meant to make her feel neglected, but it seemed like she was getting tired of hearing the same excuses. "I'm doing this for us, Morgan. I'm trying to build a future here. This restaurant, it's our future. Don't you see that?" She looked at me, disappointment written all over her face. "I don't want a future that comes at the expense of the present, Alex. I want a partner, not someone who's always at work. And this restaurant, it's always been there. But I need you here. I need you, not just your promises." It hit me like a ton of bricks. We were fighting about something that I thought was temporary, something I thought would just blow over. But it was clear that she wasn't just frustrated about tonight. She was frustrated about the entire situation, about me choosing work over her time and time again. "I can't just quit, Morgan. You know how important this place is to my family," I said, my voice softer now. "I get that, Alex. But what about us? What about me?" Her eyes were starting to tear up. "You said you wanted this future with me, but all I see is you working yourself into the ground for something that doesn't even include me." Her words stung, and I didn't know what to say. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her that we'd figure it out, but everything felt so tangled up. I loved her, but I couldn't just walk away from my family's business. I had too many obligations, too many people relying on me. "I can work with you, Morgan," I suggested, my mind racing. "I could take fewer shifts, work with you at the shop, help you manage things. Maybe we could make it work together." She shook her head, her hands falling to her sides. "I don't need you to work with me, Alex. I don't need to be your project. I need a partner, someone who actually makes time for me. And I'm starting to wonder if that's something you're capable of." It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I had always thought we were on the same page, that our future was set in stone. But this was the first time I really questioned whether we had the same priorities. Was I really putting the restaurant ahead of her? Was I failing her as a partner? The silence between us stretched on, and I could feel the distance growing. We had always been able to talk things through before, but now it felt like we were miles apart. I wanted to fix it, to make it right, but I didn't know how. After that night, things between Morgan and me were never the same. The fight lingered in the air, like a storm cloud we couldn't escape. We tried to carry on, pretending everything was fine, but the cracks in our relationship grew wider with each passing day. One evening, about a week after our argument, Morgan came home from work unusually quiet. Normally, she'd greet me with a hug or at least a smile, but this time, she walked past me without a word and went straight to the kitchen. I followed her, my stomach already in knots. "Hey, you okay?" I asked cautiously, leaning against the doorway. She didn't look at me as she set her bag down on the counter. "We need to talk," she said, her voice flat. Those 4 words hit me like a freight train. I had a bad feeling about where this was going, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Okay, what's on your mind?" She finally turned to face me, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I've been thinking about us, about everything. And I don't think I can do this anymore, Alex." I stared at her, my mind struggling to process what she was saying. "What do you mean you can't do this?" "Morgan, we're planning a wedding. We've been together for 4 years. You can't just—" She cut me off, her voice trembling slightly. "I can't keep pretending that I'm okay with this. Your job, your schedule, it's not just a small issue. It's our whole lives. And I've tried to be patient. I've tried to understand. But I can't keep waiting for something to change when it never does." I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath me. "Morgan, you knew what my life was like before we got engaged. You knew the hours, the responsibilities. Why is this suddenly such a big deal now?" "Because I thought things would be different," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought once we got serious, once we started planning a life together, you'd realize how important it is to actually be present. But you haven't, Alex. And I don't think you ever will." Her words stung like a slap to the face. "That's not fair, Morgan. I've been doing everything I can to support us, to build a future for us. You think this job is just about me? It's about us, about providing for our life together. I thought you understood that." "I did," she said quietly. "But it's not enough anymore. I need more than just financial stability, Alex. I need someone who's there for me, who prioritizes me. And right now, I don't feel like I'm even on your radar." The room was spinning. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So what? You're just giving up? After everything we've been through, you're throwing it all away because you don't like my job?" Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might change her mind. But then she straightened her shoulders and said the words that would haunt me for months to come. "I think we should break up." I laughed bitterly, more out of disbelief than anything else. "Break up? You're serious? You're willing to walk away from 4 years together because of my work schedule? Do you even hear how ridiculous that sounds?" She flinched, but she didn't back down. "It's not just about the schedule, Alex. It's about feeling like I'm always going to come second. And I can't live like that anymore." I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest. "So what? You're just going to bail? After everything I've sacrificed for us, you're going to throw it all away because you're too selfish to see the bigger picture?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she stood her ground. "I'm not being selfish, Alex. I'm choosing myself because you won't. And I'm sorry if that hurts you, but I can't keep sacrificing my happiness for something that isn't working." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The woman I had planned to spend my life with, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was walking away because I worked too much. It felt like a betrayal on every level. "What about the wedding?" I asked, my voice shaking with anger. "What about everything we've been planning? You're just going to throw that all away, too?" She hesitated, and for a moment, I thought she might reconsider. But then she said, "It's better to end things now than to go through with something that's only going to make us both miserable." I couldn't believe it. "And what? You think we can just go back to being friends after this? Is that what you want?" She looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to lose you completely, Alex. I still care about you. I just don't think we can be together anymore. Her words felt like a knife to the chest. Friends? You think I can just sit around and watch you move on with your life while I'm stuck here picking up the pieces? You've got to be kidding me, Morgan. She didn't respond, and the silence between us was deafening. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to do something to make her understand how much she was hurting me. But instead, I just stood there, feeling like my entire world had come crashing down. Finally, I managed to say, if you walk out that door, don't expect me to be waiting for you on the other side. You don't get to break my heart and then ask me to be your friend. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand, she said quietly. I'm sorry, Alex. And with that, she turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving me standing there, shattered and alone. I thought the worst part of breaking up with Morgan would be the initial shock. Her walking out the door, the realization that our relationship was over. But I was wrong. The hardest part was what came after. She didn't move out. Instead, she lingered in the apartment like a ghost of our past, making every moment a fresh reminder of what I had lost. The day after our breakup, I woke up to the sound of her in the kitchen, clinking mugs and making coffee like it was just another day. For a split second, I thought everything was fine. Then it hit me. We weren't fine. We were done. I walked into the kitchen, still groggy, and found her sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. She looked up at me with a hesitant smile. Morning, she said softly, as if nothing had happened. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to yell, to demand to know why she was still here. But another part of me, the part still clinging to the hope that this was all a bad dream, just nodded and grabbed a mug from the cabinet. We spent the next few days tiptoeing around each other. I'd go to work and come home to find her watching TV in the living room or scrolling on her phone in the bedroom. It was like she had no intention of leaving. At first, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she just needed time to find a new place. But as the days turned into weeks, my patience started to wear thin. One evening, about 2 weeks after the breakup, I decided to confront her. I found her in the living room, curled up on the couch with a blanket. She looked up as I walked in, her expression cautious. Morgan, I started, trying to keep my voice calm. We need to talk? She nodded slowly and sat up, folding the blanket over her lap. Okay, what's on your mind? I took a deep breath. You can't stay here. This is my apartment, and I think it's time for you to move out. Her face fell, and for a moment, she looked genuinely hurt. Alex, I know this is awkward, but I just need a little more time. I'm looking for a place, I swear. I haven't found anything yet. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorway. Morgan, it's been 2 weeks. You've had plenty of time to at least start making arrangements. You can't just stay here indefinitely. It's not fair to either of us. She bit her lip, her eyes darting away. I know it's not ideal, but where am I supposed to go? You know I don't have family nearby, and all my friends are either too far away or don't have the space. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. Look, I'm not trying to be an asshole here. I get that this is hard, but it's not my responsibility to figure out where you go. You ended this relationship, Morgan. You decided we weren't working, so now it's on you to figure out the next step. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a second, I almost caved. But then I remembered the hours of sleepless nights, the gut-wrenching pain of seeing her every day and knowing she didn't want me anymore. I couldn't keep doing this. I'll give you until the end of the month, I said firmly. That's 2 more weeks. After that, I need you to be out. She nodded reluctantly, wiping at her eyes. Okay, she whispered. I'll figure something out. I thought that would be the end of it, but Morgan had a way of making things more complicated. Over the next few days, she started acting different. She'd cook dinner for both of us, even though I hadn't asked her to. She'd leave little notes around the apartment, things like, "Hope you have a good day," smiley face, or "Don't forget your lunch." At first, I thought it was her way of being friendly, of trying to smooth things over. But then I started to notice the way she'd linger in the kitchen when I was making coffee, or how she'd casually bring up old memories during dinner. One night, as we were eating the pasta she'd made, she looked at me and said, Do you ever think about how things used to be? Before all the fights, before everything? I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. What are you talking about, Morgan? She shrugged, twirling her pasta around her fork. I miss us, Alex. I miss the way we used to be. I set my fork down, my appetite suddenly gone. Morgan, you can't do this. You're the one who ended things, remember? You're the one who said we weren't working. I know, she said quickly, her eyes wide. I know, and I still think it was the right decision. But that doesn't mean I don't care about you. It doesn't mean I don't miss you. I stared at her, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Morgan, if you care about me, then respect what I'm asking. Move out. Let me move on. She looked down at her plate, her shoulders slumping. I will, she said quietly. I promise. But promises from Morgan didn't mean much anymore. A few days later, I came home to find her sitting at the dining table, the engagement ring I had given her resting in front of her. It was a beautiful ring, custom designed, with a diamond that cost more than I'd like to admit. I had poured months of savings into that ring, thinking it was a symbol of our future together. Now, it just felt like a cruel reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I've been thinking about this, she said, gesturing to the ring. I know you probably want it back. I nodded, my throat tight. Yeah, I do. She pushed it toward me, her expression unreadable. Here, I don't want to keep something that's just going to remind me of what we lost. I reached out and picked up the ring, the weight of it feeling heavier than it should. Thanks, I said quietly. She hesitated, then added, For what it's worth, Alex, I really did love you. I still do, in a way. I'm sorry it had to end like this. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold on to the idea that some part of her still cared. But another part of me knew that caring wasn't enough. It never had been. Me too, I said finally, slipping the ring into my pocket. But it doesn't change anything. After Morgan moved out, I thought I'd finally have some peace. But instead, the apartment felt emptier than I ever imagined. Her perfume still lingered on the furniture, her favorite coffee mug sat abandoned in the cupboard, and every corner of the place seemed to echo with memories of her. I was determined to move on, though. I cleaned out her things, packed them into boxes, and left them by the door for her to pick up. One evening, as I was going through the drawers in our shared desk to reorganize, I stumbled across something I hadn't expected, a small, leather-bound journal. At first, I wasn't sure whose it was. It looked new, barely worn, and I couldn't recall ever seeing Morgan write in a diary. But when I opened it, her handwriting was unmistakable. My first instinct was to close it and put it away. Whatever was in there wasn't meant for me. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the lingering anger, the unresolved frustration of how everything had fallen apart. Or maybe it was just curiosity. Whatever it was, I couldn't stop myself from flipping to the first page. The entries started innocently enough. She wrote about her day, her work, our dates. But as I read on, a different picture began to emerge. The woman I thought I knew so well had been harboring thoughts and feelings I never could have guessed. One entry, dated about 6 months before our breakup, caught my attention. Alex is a good guy. Everyone says that, and I know it's true. He's sweet, dependable, and hardworking. But sometimes, I feel like that's all there is to him. I don't know if that's enough for me. Am I terrible for thinking that? I stared at the words, my heart sinking. Was this how she'd felt all along? Had she been questioning us for months, while I'd been blissfully unaware? I flipped to the next entry, desperate for answers. We went to dinner with my friends tonight, and Alex barely said a word. I know he's shy, but it's so frustrating sometimes. I feel like I'm constantly making excuses for him. They all ask me why I'm with someone so boring. I hate that word, but it's what they think. And sometimes I wonder if they're right. Boring. The word hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd always known I wasn't the most outgoing or exciting person, but I thought Morgan loved me for who I was. Clearly, I'd been wrong. As I read further, the entries became more pointed, more critical. She wrote about how my job consumed my life, how she felt neglected and unimportant. But what hurt the most was finding the entry where she first mentioned the idea of breaking up with me. I don't think I can do this anymore. I've tried to be patient, to make this work, but I feel like I'm losing myself. Alex is never going to change, and I can't keep waiting for something that isn't going to happen. I need to start thinking about what I want, about what makes me happy. Maybe it's time to let go. The date on the entry was 2 months before she ended things. She had already made up her mind, and yet she stayed. She smiled at me, kissed me, slept next to me, all while knowing she was planning to leave. The thought made my stomach turn. I kept reading, unable to stop myself, even as the words cut deeper. In one entry, she wrote about how she felt guilty for not being honest with me. Alex deserves better than this. He's a good person, and he doesn't deserve to be with someone who doesn't love him the way he loves me. But how do I tell him? How do I break his heart without completely destroying him? The final entries were the hardest to read. By then, she had fully convinced herself that breaking up was the right decision. But what struck me most was a passage where she reflected on why she had fallen for me in the first place. When I first met Alex, I was drawn to him because he was so different from anyone I'd ever dated. He was safe, reliable, everything I thought I wanted. But now, I realize I fell in love with the idea of him, not the real him. I wanted someone who would ground me, who would make me feel secure. But now that I have that, I feel trapped. I don't know if I ever really loved him, or if I just loved the idea of him. Those words broke me. She hadn't loved me, at least not in the way I thought she had. She had loved a version of me that existed only in her mind, an idealized version that I could never live up to. And when reality didn't match her expectations, she decided to leave. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, betrayal. But most of all, I felt empty. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship, about her, had been turned upside down. I had spent 4 years building a life with someone who didn't truly love me, who didn't see me for who I was. For a while, I just sat there, staring at the journal. Part of me wanted to call her, to demand an explanation. But what good would that do? She had already said everything she needed to say in those pages. There was nothing left to discuss. Instead, I decided to focus on myself. I couldn't change the past, couldn't undo the pain she had caused, but I could move forward. I could learn from this, grow from it. I could become the person I wanted to be, not for her, or for anyone else, but for me. Looking back, I realized that our relationship had been doomed from the start. Morgan and I were never truly compatible. We had different needs, different expectations, different visions for the future. And while I had been willing to overlook those differences, she hadn't. In the end, finding her journal was a blessing in disguise. It gave me the closure I needed, the clarity to see the truth. Morgan didn't love the real me, but that didn't mean I was unworthy of love. It just meant I needed to find someone who would love me for who I was, flaws and all. As I packed the journal away with the rest of her things, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't consumed by anger or sadness. Instead, I felt hopeful. The relationship might have ended, but my story was far from over. After Morgan left, I thought things would start to settle down. But it seemed like the breakup wasn't just between the two of us. It became everyone else's business too. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, family, and even people I barely knew, all wanting to know what happened. It didn't take long for me to realize that Morgan had been telling her side of the story to anyone who would listen. The first sign of trouble came when my mom called. I had barely spoken to her about the breakup, mostly because I didn't want to relive it. But she sounded concerned, her voice tight with worry. "Alex," she said, "I just got off the phone with Morgan. She's really upset." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Of course she is, Mom. Breakups are hard." "No, I mean, she said you were working too much, ignoring her, and refusing to compromise. She said she felt like you didn't care about her anymore." Her words hit me like a slap. I felt my stomach twist with a mix of anger and disbelief. "That's not true," I said firmly. "She broke up with me because she decided she didn't love me the way she thought she did. She told me herself." "Well, that's not the story she's telling," my mom said. "She's making it sound like you were neglecting her, like you were the one who pushed her away." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Morgan had spun the breakup into some sob story that painted me as the villain. "Mom, you know me. Do you really think I would treat her like that? I don't, she said quickly. But other people might, especially if they only hear her side. That's when I realized just how much damage Morgan's version of events could do. She wasn't just venting to her friends. She was rewriting the narrative, and I was the scapegoat. The next few days were a nightmare. My friend Lucas called me out of the blue, his tone hesitant. Hey man, he said, I just wanted to check in. I heard about you and Morgan. Yeah, it's been rough, I said, trying to keep my voice even. Look, I don't want to make things worse, but she's been saying some stuff about you. Like, that you were ignoring her and refusing to make time for her. I didn't believe it, but some of the others, they're starting to take her side. I felt my chest tighten with frustration. Lucas had always been a good friend, and I could tell he didn't want to accuse me of anything. But the fact that people were even questioning my character stung. Lucas, you know me. You've seen how much I work to make that relationship work. She's twisting the truth to make herself look better. I believe you, he said quickly. I just thought you should know what's going around. I thanked him, but after we hung up, I felt like the walls were closing in. Everywhere I turned, it seemed like someone else had heard Morgan's version of the breakup. Even my coworkers started acting differently, giving me sympathetic looks or awkwardly avoiding the topic altogether. The worst part, though, was when Morgan got my mom involved again. One afternoon, I stopped by my parents' house for dinner, hoping for a bit of normalcy. But as soon as I walked in, I could tell something was off. My mom was sitting at the kitchen table, her arms crossed and a worried expression on her face. Alex, she said, we need to talk. I sighed, dropping my keys on the counter. What now? It's about Morgan, she said. She called me again. She's saying you're being cold and unkind to her, that you're refusing to help her move on. Are you serious? I snapped, my frustration boiling over. Mom, she's the one who dumped me. She's the one who stayed in my apartment for weeks, refusing to leave. And now she's playing the victim? My mom looked taken aback, but she didn't interrupt. She's making it sound like you're punishing her for ending things, she said carefully. And I want to make sure you're okay. I'm not okay, I said, my voice cracking. I'm trying to rebuild my life after she tore it apart, and now she's spreading lies about me to anyone who will listen. Do you have any idea how hard that is? My mom's expression softened, and she reached out to squeeze my hand. I didn't know it was that bad, she admitted. But you have to understand, Morgan sounded really upset. She said she felt like you were shutting her out. Of course she's upset, I said bitterly. She's upset because she didn't get to walk away from this looking like the perfect, innocent victim. She's upset because I didn't just roll over and let her control the narrative. My mom nodded slowly, as if she was finally starting to see the bigger picture. I won't interfere anymore, she said quietly. I just hate seeing you go through this. Thanks, Mom, I said, feeling a small weight lift off my shoulders. I appreciate it. Despite my mom's promise to stay out of it, the pressure from other people didn't stop. Morgan's friends started messaging me, some of them outright accusing me of being a bad partner. One even said, "You should be ashamed of how you treated her." It was infuriating. I wanted to defend myself, to set the record straight, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. These people had already made up their minds, and nothing I said would change that. The final straw came when I ran into Morgan at a coffee shop. She was sitting with a group of her friends, laughing and chatting like nothing had happened. When she saw me, her expression faltered, and she quickly excused herself to come talk to me. "Alex," she said, her tone overly sweet. "How are you doing?" "Cut the act, Morgan," I said coldly. "I know what you've been telling people about me." Her smile disappeared, and she crossed her arms defensively. "I'm just telling the truth." "No," I said firmly, "you're telling your version of the truth. You're making me out to be the bad guy because you can't handle the fact that you ended things and still came out looking bad." Her face turned red, but she didn't respond. After a moment, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, my fists clenched. By the time I got home, I felt completely drained. But as I sat down on the couch and let the silence wash over me, I realized something important. No matter what Morgan said, no matter how many people believed her lies, I knew the truth. And so did the people who mattered most. like my mom and Lucas. That was enough. From that moment on, I decided to stop letting Morgan control my life. I blocked her on social media, stopped responding to her friends, and focused on moving forward. It wasn't easy, but it was the only way to reclaim my peace. After Morgan left, I thought I had finally closed the chapter on her. But life had other plans, and the next blow came from someone I never would have expected. My cousin Jake? Jake and I had grown up together. We were inseparable, more like brothers than cousins. He was the guy I called when I needed advice, a favor, or just someone to hang out with. So when I found out he was seeing Morgan, I felt my world tilt sideways. The news came from Amber, a mutual friend. She texted me one night with a message that made my heart drop. "Alex, I don't know if you've heard, but Morgan's been hanging out with Jake. I saw them at a bar together last night." I stared at the screen, rereading the words over and over. It didn't make sense. Jake knew everything I'd been through with Morgan, how much she'd hurt me. He'd been there during the worst days of the breakup, the one person I thought I could count on. For him to do this felt like the ultimate betrayal. I called him immediately. He answered, sounding casual and unsuspecting. "Hey man, what's up? What the hell is going on with you and Morgan?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. There was a long pause. "Alex, I was going to tell you." "You were going to tell me? When? After everyone else already knew? Do you have any idea how messed up this is?" "She reached out to me," he said defensively. "She was struggling after the breakup, and we started talking. One thing led to another. One thing led to another? That's the best you've got?" I could feel my chest tightening, anger and disbelief coursing through me. "You've been talking to the woman who tore my life apart, and now you're dating her?" "It's not like that," Jake said quickly. "It just happened." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You knew what she did to me, Jake. You knew how much she hurt me. And you still thought it was okay to go there?" "She's not the same person with me," he said weakly. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to hurt me? That's rich," I snapped. "You stabbed me in the back, and you think saying you didn't mean to will make it better?" "Alex, come on." "No." I cut him off. "Don't call me. Don't text me. Don't even think about trying to justify this. You made your choice, Jake, and I'm making mine." I hung up before he could say another word. My hands were shaking as I set the phone down. It felt like the walls were closing in around me. First Morgan, now Jake. The two people I thought I could trust the most had turned out to be the ones to betray me. The next day, Morgan showed up at my apartment. I almost didn't answer the door, but curiosity and anger got the better of me. She stood there, looking nervous and unsure. "I know you're upset," she said, her voice soft. "But I just wanted to explain." "There's nothing to explain," I said flatly. "You and Jake decided to betray me. What else is there to say?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel any sympathy. "It's not like that," she said. "After we broke up, I was a mess. Jake was just there. He listened to me in a way you never did." I felt my stomach churn. "Are you seriously trying to pin this on me?" "That's not what I'm saying," she said quickly. "I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. But Jake and I—" "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't try to justify this. You don't get to stand here and pretend this is okay." She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "You did. And now you're standing here, expecting what? Forgiveness? Understanding? You made your choices, Morgan. Live with them." Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. I was done letting her manipulate me. "Get out," I said, stepping back from the door. "And don't come back." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded and walked away without another word. The next few weeks were brutal. Cutting ties with both Morgan and Jake felt like losing pieces of myself. I blocked their numbers and deleted them from my social media, but their absence didn't fill the void they left behind. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering how I hadn't seen this coming. But no matter how much I analyzed it, I couldn't make sense of their betrayal. Eventually, I realized I needed help. I started therapy, something I'd been avoiding for years. It wasn't easy to open up about everything. The heartbreak, the anger, the feelings of worthlessness. But my therapist helped me see things more clearly. She reminded me that I wasn't responsible for other people's actions. Morgan and Jake had made their choices, and their betrayal said more about them than it did about me.